there's been a feast of books, of introductory books on Islam and Muslims, you're quite right, and particularly since the tragic events of September the 11th, 2001. Many of these books are good works of scholarship, and those that are good tend to be aimed at very much a scholarly audience. The books that are aimed at an intelligent general public are often ones which dumb down, shall we say, the rich heritage of Islam, the analytical issues, the historical narrative, and so on. What we've tried to do here that is different is to address an intelligent general public in language that is accessible, but with scholarship that is accurate and of the highest quality. We also want to reach scholars, university students, in other words, an inclusive audience that spans the full range of people that would have an interest post 9/11 in the world of Islam. Now, the reason I mentioned 9/11 in this regard was not only because of the plethora of books that has come out, but also because 9/11 has changed the way we see the world of Islam. Indeed, the relationship between the religious and the secular. We now have to revisit what the Qur'an is, who the Prophet was, what the story has been until where we are, and of course what Muslim networks are, what's the role of women. And this revisitation means that what was familiar before, what people might have thought they knew about the Qur'an or the Prophet or about the historical narrative, needs to be rethought. And this companion is an invitation to revisit those worlds and to re-understand what might have been thought to be obvious. But above all, as the patron of this institute, His Highness the Aga Khan has put it, to address the void of knowledge, the current void of knowledge that prevails in the way the world understands Islam and Muslims, and this applies to Muslims themselves as well. This companion inaugurates a new series, the Muslim Heritage series, which is a great journey, as we see it, into the universe from its birth of Islam that I spoke about earlier. And the first volume, this companion to the Muslim world, is a collection of essentials that must accompany the journey, a sort of cultural and intellectual map of the Muslim world. It wasn't all that difficult to decide that we had to include in this book foundational matters, key driving forces, and where we are now issues. In other words, that we had to look at what the Qur'an is, at the same time ask what the mosque is and why is it the way it is. Why is the role of women defined in a particular way? Why do some of them feel obliged to veil and some not? What is the relationship that the Prophet saw, or that the Qur'an saw, between women and faith, and how has it evolved in the actual lived narrative of Muslims? These issues simply had to be included in the book. Now, you know, the great historian of Islam, the late great Marshall Hodgson, remarked that at the beginning of modernity, this would be in the 1500s, if a visitor from Mars were to come down to Earth and ask, which way is this world going, Hodgson thought that it was a no-brainer that he would think, or she would think, that the world is going to be Muslim. Hodgson thought that so dominant was the world of culture, geography, science, governance in the world of Islam, not just the expanse of its empire, that it was clearly obvious that the world was going to be Muslim. What happened? The West became the maker of modernity, and Islam had to play a catch-up role. But Hodgson is not pessimistic. He says, even now, the world of Islam can shape how modernity actually pans out. It's an ongoing journey, after all. And this book is an engagement with the issues that really matter if the Muslim world is going to help shape the way that modernity maps out. Colonial rule, of course, meant Western modernity being brought to the Muslim world. It meant that Asia, Central Asia and South Asia differently, the Middle East, Africa, were now captives to a European way of looking at modernity. And European modernity now came to the doorstep of the Muslim world with colonial rule. Inevitably, this led to a clash between the traditions of indigenous cultures and the new culture and cultures from the outside that colonialism brought in. Inevitably, there is a lot of forgetfulness when this happens. Take language. French and English became the languages of the Muslim world over and above Arabic, Persian, Urdu, Swahili, and so on. Take the sense of place. Once upon a time, the Silk Road dominated how Asians traded with each other, met with each other, spoke with each other. That was now replaced with metropolitan colonial centers that became now the dominant focal points of commerce, of intellectual life. The new Silk Roads led to the West. They led to Paris and to London and to Lisbon and to Madrid. They did not lead simply from Xi'an to Istanbul with great points in between and with Indian Ocean routes that connected each other as a complete universe. Now, very much a sense of place was displaced. But above all, this new modernity was secular. And if a modernity which is secular, technological, and materialist confronts traditions that are not, then the forgetfulness, perhaps at its most dangerous, can mean a forgetting of identity. It can mean that the sense of the secular and the materialist displaces your intuitions of who you are and where you want to go. And I do think that this sense of forgetfulness, sometimes willful, sometimes inadvertent, is a serious issue in how any civilization sees itself and understands its past, present, and future. In terms of what values, my humble opinion would be that the balance of faith and intellect, of deen and aql, indeed of secular and sacred, of deen and dunya, those balances tend to be the ethical fulcrum, if you will, around which the navigation of modernity, Muslim modernity, might happen. It is tempting to think that when one is reading a book like The Companion, that it makes a case out for the distinctiveness of the Muslim world. And of course, every civilization and Islam is composed of many civilizations, but all civilizations are distinctive in important ways. However, it's important not to think of the Muslim world as somehow so distinctive that it's not been part of the grand narrative of world history at large. In other words, there are overlapping colonial and post-colonial worlds, Western worlds, Chinese worlds, the Muslim world, and so on. By which I mean that there are certain experiences in the journeys into modernity that are familiar. The emphasis, for example, on rationality, on rational organization of the public square, on technology, on the sense of individual worth, on the importance of constitutions and defining national life, on the importance of governance and accountability. These have become universal. And that is what I mean when I talk about overlapping worlds in my introduction to this book. But it is profoundly important to understand that overlapping worlds, shared spaces, shared values, cannot somehow trump or trample on that which is distinctive in Muslim civilization. And what has been distinctive has been particularly, as we enter modernity, the relationship between faith and the secular world. And it seems to me the values that go with that, what I referred to earlier in terms of the balance of the secular and the sacred, the balance between intellectual and faithful ways of understanding the world at large and religion in it, those navigational points are critical if one is to walk the tripwire intelligently between that which is distinctive and that which is overlapping. With the intellectual and cultural map which the companion gives us, I would like to think that when one has come to the end of this particular companion, certain large questions will present themselves, including some that you have just referred to. For instance, the ethics that influence, guide, engage Muslims, the cultural plurality that makes up the Muslim world. I referred to civilizations in the plural earlier on, and Amir Hussein in this book refers to Islam in the plural as a deeply important way of engaging with the interpretations of Scripture and so on. This signals what the Muslim Heritage series is about. So the next volume, inshallah, as Muslims say, by the will of God, will be a guide to Muslim ethics, followed by a companion to Muslim cultures. With the end of the companion series, we will then, as part of this Muslim Heritage series, look at makers and makings of the Muslim world in the form of monographs. So we will look at great figures in Muslim civilization and culture, as well as critical forces that shaped the way the Muslim world has mapped out. So the series is this larger journey that seeks to be, once again, accessible, accurate, engaging. And we do hope that a companion sets a decent enough inaugural example with regard to where this journey is going.